Coming up on Mount Hermeneutics, are we sure that Adam was the first man? This episode goes out to you, young earthers, so pay attention. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck.
Yes, I'm quite proud of myself, if you can't tell.
I'm just kidding. We're sorry. We're sorry. Please come back.
Mount Hermeneutics is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, simply by searching for Mount Hermeneutics. And make it easier on yourself if you just go ahead and just save and subscribe and, hit a notification bell or whatever it is that you are listening to the show right now. And if it's your first time with us, I am Andre. That is Matt. That is Brian. Fellas, what's happening?
What's up?
How we doing?
We're okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm okay.
If you're okay, I'm okay.
I mean, then we just okay.
All right.
It's all gonna be all right.
What anything going on?
San Diego's being weird with the weather. It rains all week and then it gets sunny on the weekend.
That's cool.
You can't really complain about that.
As if God's like, listen, we're tired of your fires. We're gonna make the grass green. But you do pay a lot of taxes and high, so you're gonna have fun on the weekends and go to the beach and it's gonna be sunny, 70 with no wind. And
yeah, California taxes are that high. You got to wonder if the most high is like me. Damn, those are some high taxes down there,
bro. He's just me down. He's like, woof, woof. Brian didn't appreciate that. He didn't like that joke.
Yeah,
not a very funny.
He's trying to decide if it's blasphemous or not. He can't decide.
It feels like it is.
It feels like it is, but is it?
It's best to err on the side of caution in these things.
You think so? Now you're making it sound like God doesn't have a sense of humor when you're the one that informed us that he's hilarious in the New Testament.
Well, Jesus is hilarious in the New Testament.
Jesus is God.
He's God in human form, joking about human stuff.
So you think God only has a sense of humor if he's in human form?
I don't think God entertains jokes about himself because he's
the Most High.
The Most High.
But what if they're funny?
I think that the bar is pretty high.
I think bar is high. That's like making a joke about the jesters in the king's court, right? If he makes a joke about the king, it better be funny.
Something can be funny, but
say that,
but still blasphemous. And I'm not sure that the funny is a license for the blasphemy. I don't think it works that way. But I just know that when Moses banged on a rock, seems like a minor thing, but because it didn't honor God as holy, Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. And so
hey, Moses didn't go to the promised land for a whole bunch of stuff.
He was
a habitual line stepper.
It was just the one thing.
And it wasn't funny. In fact, it didn't pass the bar. It's like, because he's strike the rock. He's like, well, strike the rock. He was mocking God. Come on.
Should we give the biblical reference for that in case anybody's trying to understand how we're just having a random joke about a Bible passage?
Sure. Yeah, couldn't hurt. It's not like an obscure thing though, but why?
It's so unobscure that none of us have it at our fingertips either, though.
Numbers 26 through 13.
Cool. That's all.
All the way in Numbers. That's
just enough to throw a breadcrumb out there if anybody wants to go look that up.
And then it's referenced again in the end of Deuteronomy.
and probably often by Moses in the afterlife.
Um,
I wonder if he brought it up at the Transfiguration. He's like, yo, remember? Bride's like, that's not funny. Like, what do you? I am not part of this. I am not them.
I disavow. Disavow.
Disavow.
so
What
so
are we talking
speak
about? Genesis?
Not because I'm so holy. It's just I'm in enough trouble already. So
you do enough on your own.
yeah.
In the beginning.
So I don't remember how we came to this topic, but I know we've talked about it a
I was
handful of
about to ask
times.
you that.
Yeah, it's come up in cross conversation. I know we've alluded to and probably, danced all around this topic, but I thought it might make sense to go ahead and just do a focused bit on this conversation because I think it's interesting. Um, I think it's fascinating, to be quite honest. Other people, I guess it depends on how hyper literal one is with their read of Genesis, and specifically if they're a young or old Earth uh, creationist type person, right? And I guess to start with, because I was just talking to somebody the other day at church who'd never
Hmm.
heard the term young Earth creationist or old Earth. We should probably explain that just briefly because it's relevant to the rest of the conversation.
Okay.
High level, super, super conversationally speaking, a young Earth Christian takes a very literal read of Genesis 1, 2, 3, just 2, 1 and 2.
Well, I would say they take a literal read of the
Well,
whole
all of
thing.
it, but
Yeah.
relevant to this part of the
But
conversation, it's Genesis 1 and 2, right?
well, let me
Creation,
let
right?
me let
The
me put
creation
it
story.
as they take what they regard to be the literal face value meaning of the book of
All
Genesis.
right, we go with that.
Because I would say that I take it literally too in what it is
Attempting to teach us
in,
versus,
in what it is in what it is actively affirming.
yeah,
But so
fair enough. But anyway, so a young Earth Christian reads the creation story in Genesis 1, 2, and they interpret that to mean that God created the earth in 6 calendar days, lunar days. And then they further use that to do math because we have all of the generational information in the Bible to come up with a age of the earth at like what 6,200 and some odd days or years,
something like that.
which is clearly at odds with all of science, which would put the earth, a little bit older than that. There's reasons behind it, and then there's secondary lines of conversation. And we don't want to turn this into a young Earth versus old Earth conversation specifically, but one of the more prevalent conversations or explanations that I've heard is that both can be true. That our dating technology and our understanding of the universe can be accurate because God created the heavens and the earth to be perfectly in time phasing with how it should look if it had been created billions of years ago.
You're saying he created the universe with the appearance of age.
Pre-aged, yeah. And there's probably some super scientific term for that. I don't know what it is. I'm uninterested in the terminology,
But in
but
the
there,
Truman Show, are we like what?
yeah, yeah.
Come
I
on,
mean,
man.
it's an argument, right? And they
Yeah.
say, look, the being, the Most High, that can create anything, um, he created the laws of physics, and so when he created all of creation, he created it within the confines of the physics that he also created. I
And he did this just so we can read Genesis and understand it perfectly. Like what? Come on.
that's
Like what?
I I
Look,
I, I
well,
don't
I'll say it. That's fucking dumb.
I. I was gonna
Not
go a
not
little
the
more.
not,
I was gonna go a
not the
little
part where
more.
God has the power to do that stuff, but like why? Like what?
Yeah, I try to be a little more
Yeah,
gentle with my brothers and
yeah.
sisters
Well,
in Christ.
yeah, and
But
I will say, like, I can respect that they're trying to honor the text.
mhm.
I
Um,
can't.
um,
But go ahead.
they're
I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
they're
Matt.
they're like they're trying to honor what they believe the text to be saying. And they see a conflict between being faithful to the text and acknowledging modern science, and they pick the text over science. Um, I can like honestly, I feel like if I was in that, if I had to make that decision, um, like I don't, I'd probably go with the science. If I really thought there was a conflict, because that would undermine my faith in the reliability of the Bible. If if every scientist in the world came to the conclusion of came to a competing conclusion, I don't think that's explainable by, the devil is deceiving them, or they just hate Christianity so much that they're I would think the problem was the ancient text, not the science. But thankfully, I'm not in that position. I don't see a conflict between the text and the science, but I can respect that if you're coming to the text, that young Earth creationism, as it's called, that is it's a valid option for consideration. But I just think if you once considered it, you'd be forced by the text to reject it. But anyway, I don't want
So,
to.
I mean, you know, I was raised in a Jehovah's Witness environment,
I heard that. Yeah, I
and
remember
they
that.
are young Earth creationists.
Are they?
And of all the things that is wrong with them, that's what stood out to me and maybe like, that's dumb. I'm out.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I say I think I would come down on the side of the science, because if it seeing the kinds of gymnastics that young Earth
Right.
creationists have to do to explain how it's the text that's right and
And
not
then
the science, I just can't.
what is it? Mean Girls, and then God killed the dinosaurs and the homosexuals.
I uh I remember having an interesting conversation with my sister-in-law, Carrie's
Hmm.
sister, and she is or was at least a young earther.
Hmm.
And the dinosaurs was actually part of that conversation point because our kids were all of the dinosaur age, right? Because
Right.
all kids love dinosaurs. And I remember her having a comment about dinosaurs not being real, and I was like, "What?" And she's a public school teacher,
Oh
Oh
no.
boy.
and so
Ooh.
I
What
was
what
like,
Bless Oklahoma.
what
"Yeah,
grade and subject?
like third, fourth grade, general studies,
Dinosaur grade?
dinosaur grade." Yeah. um, but
Poor kids.
But one time, her and the kids came up to our house to visit, and Carrie and them went to the Lloyd Noble Science Museum.
Uh-oh.
The whole point is it's got dinosaurs all over the place
We-
because you bring your kids and they can crawl on the dinosaur skeletons and stuff. And I was
Which
like,
are fake.
I, I was like, what are y'all doing? You're going to the dinosaur exhibits, and Carrie's like, I mean, I'm just going because Alyssa wants to go see them. I just thought the whole thing was funny. I have no idea how she's
Did it
where
did
she
it
comes down on this now. We don't tend to have deep theological conversations
I'll
when
bet that day was the turning point. I bet she's
I think I mean everyone knows that dinosaurs are part of the abomination of the Nephilim when they were when the gods were on the earth and creating hybrid things. I read a Brian Godawa book and he told all about it. That's where the dinosaurs came from. So is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
breeding of lots of animals and
it's certainly interesting. But then, I find all of this conversation to be really intriguing because you get in that same vein of talking about the creation story. And, I know we teased with Adam, but just to talk about that entire section of the Bible, I never really thought a lot about Adam being the first man. I just kind of read it. Okay, Adam was the first man. But then the story of Cain and Abel happens. And For any of those that don't know the story, Cain and Abel
This
are
is actually a mid shift topic of conversation in about what circa 96
yeah.
or so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Matt.
This is kind of when the DCW kind of started for us, Dre.
Yeah.
Was this conversation? Um, so for those that don't know, Cain and Abel are the first two descendants of Adam and Eve. Their
Or the
first two
first
sons.
sons.
Yeah, or their first mentioned sons, anyway, right? Um, and yada yada yada. Cain kills Abel, and for murdering his brother, he is cast out of uh, the area where they are. They've already been cast out of the garden at this point, right? For the fall. The fall's already happened. Um, but Cain is sent out. And two things happen. And it's kind of small in the text. It's not like a big portion of the Bible. So a lot of people miss this. Two things happen. A lot of people have heard of the mark of Cain, but they don't really know where it comes from. Well, it comes because Cain says to God, if you cast me out of here, those other people are going to kill me. What other people? But then God says, no, they won't, because I'm going to put a mark on you and you're not to be touched. And then Cain leaves and he goes to this other place and he meets his wife.
And he builds a
And
city.
he builds a city and they like live happily ever after, kind of, sort of. Right? So this all happens in like Genesis before the flood, like this. And this is
Yeah,
almost like a footnote in the
and
Bible, right?
it's worth noting, you said the first sons that we know about. Um, I wouldn't qualify it.
Well,
And
I say that for, I said it for a reason. Go ahead, but go ahead. I'll explain why, but go ahead.
well, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant, gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of Yahweh, I've brought forth a man," and she named him Cain because it means brought forth. So, like I think the point of that is to sort of emphasize the novelty of what just happened. Like she brought a human out of herself, and like so, I don't think she was. Clearly, this is her firstborn.
I
So,
agree.
That's fine. I don't have any qualms with
but
that.
I don't say that to dispute the point I think you're making, but for her it was the first one. But it was anyway, I'll let you
Maybe
finish
the
your
first
point.
one was Lilith.
Well, no, that's a different conversation. That's before
It's still fun.
Eve,
That's
but
fun. Yeah.
um, we digress. No, the reason I mentioned the first ones that we know of is because when I've brought this conversation point up, right? So I say to other people, I say, okay, Adam was the first, but it doesn't say he was the only. It just says first, and we're not given any more information because it's not necessary. Um, so then I follow up with, when Cain went to Og or Magog,
Nod.
Nod, thank you.
Nod.
When he goes to Nod, and meets his wife and builds a city, and it's populated. It's not as if he just meets this random one woman wandering in the desert.
And
Like
he built a city with
he goes to a land where there are people, right? Where did they come from? And so there's only two options. I guess there's multiple options, but there's kind of two primary ideas. Either there were just other people, or Adam and Eve had a whole bunch of other children that weren't specified in the Bible that had already scurried off, and he was just catching up with some of his other siblings. I mean, that's kind of what we're left with. There's not a lot of other options. Um, so
Well,
anyway, the common counter to this idea or this question that I have is they'll say, well, the daughters aren't named, right? Like the boys are named in the Bible when it talks about Adam and Eve's kids, but there's clearly a bunch of daughters that are unnamed, and we don't have to get into the patriarchy and why the women aren't named in the Bible, but then that would lead you to believe that Nod was full of daughters of Cain and Abel that of Adam and Eve that for whatever reason weren't living with their parents, and that doesn't really make
there's
a
a
lot of
bunch of women
sense.
out there roaming around by themselves,
Yeah,
waiting for a man, waiting for Cain to big time sin and get out there and he get to just wed a
yeah.
bunch of women.
So
what
anyway,
I think
as Dre mentioned, this was kind of one of the first aha moments that I had as a young Marine reading a Bible in the middle of the night inside of the National Security Agency. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? Like, this doesn't make any sense, because I was coming at this reading with the idea that the only humans on the earth were Adam and Eve and their direct descendants. But the text clearly disagrees with that premise. Brian, what do you want to say? That's pretty much the table setting that I wanted to do to
Well,
start the story.
well, yeah, and conspicuously, like there's like the writer of Genesis doesn't see fit to like explain where these people came from.
Right?
It's like the writer and the audience just took it for granted as perfectly obvious that there are other people around.
Right.
And there's no explanation given for that. So there's
I think
that.
I think the writer of Genesis does.
Okay, what do you got?
Because there's two creation stories back to back. You have chapter 1 and you have chapter 2. Right? So in one, let us make man in our image, right? And it's kind of like this collective creation where we're gonna make man and woman, and they're gonna go be fruitful and multiply and go fill the earth, right? And to me, I think that's where the council comes in. Like, hey, these are your people over there and your people. Um, and then in chapter 2, when he makes Adam specifically, so in my mind, as I'm reading that, you have this collective thing of humans being made, and now you have a specific man who gets kind of called out, and um and in that, Adam is made for a specific purpose, for him as a lineage, and not necessarily as mankind itself. He's a lineage of man. Maybe an archetype of man. Maybe the other ones were prototypes of man. It doesn't really say that, but I don't think that I don't think the writer of Genesis said, "Hey, we made man," and then do the story again with the very next chapter. That's
Yeah,
always confused me until the DCW came to mind, where we talk about let us. And then there's also different, because in chapter 1, he doesn't say that God himself breathes life into the man. So Adam has a special image bearer, special life breath. And I read somewhere that even the word Adam itself, right? So it means of the earth, but in chapter 1, it doesn't say ha Adame, it just says Adame. So ha Adame, meaning that it's, a specific dude, even though, man and mankind can have these double entendres, right? And what it means, but chapter
yeah,
2, Adam and Eve are specific.
yeah. There are a few different camps on this. Some people see the Genesis 2 as a separate creation story. Others see it as a follow-on and kind of an expansion of what happened on day 6. Um, I don't know which it is.
But
But I think that they're sufficiently thematically similar. Like the second one builds on the second in a way that I kind of lean toward it being an expansion of the same story. But like you have God telling the land to bring forth these living creatures and cattle and creeping things of every kind. And then he makes man in his image, in the image of God. He made them male and female. He created them, and then he gave them the command to be fruitful and multiply, increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, and gave them dominion over all of the animals of creation. But but he's called is he called Adam in Genesis 1? I Hold
No,
on.
he doesn't name him.
Um, well, hold on 1 second here. We are
No, because
professionals and we are
I
prepared.
was reading as you were talking. So 126 is when he says, "And let us make man in our image."
Yeah.
And then it just says he made him in his image. Male
But
or
I
female.
think the word, and I don't know if
But
there's a footnote. I think Adama is used. They just don't
but
say Adam
but
in
the
the English
Hebrew,
translation.
yeah, the Hebrew is Adam. So it means
Yes.
the same thing. It means of the earth. And then in Genesis 2, it's much more emphasized that man is made from he's formed from the dust of the earth, and then God breathes into his nostrils and he became a living being. And then he brings the animals to Adam to see what he will name them, which is
Mhm.
this is an exercise of authority over them. So it kind of continues on the theme of Adam being made in God's image, being given dominion over the animals. And I talk about the scholar John Walton a lot in his Lost World series. In his Lost World of Genesis 1, he makes the case that, well, first, and this kind of addresses the young Earth creationist stuff. I'm going to do this as quick as I can, little info dump, because it touches on so many things we've been talking about and kind of brings them together into a common theme. But he makes the case that Genesis 1 is not an account. It's not intended to be account of the material origins of the world, but of the functional origins of the world. And that creation, like to to create in the ancient Near Eastern thinking, was not to bring something into existence like in a material sense, but in a functional sense. And what you get in Genesis 1 is God creating the world to function in relation to man, and it's to function as a temple. That's what you get from the seventh day when it says God rested. He settled into creation as his temple. A temple in the ancient Near East is a microcosm of the world, and the idol in the temple represents that God ruling over the world. But here, the idol that he places in the temple to represent him ruling over the world is man. That's what it means to be the image of God, or the image of a God. The image of a God is an idol. So basically, he wants to rule the world through man, and that's kind of what like the Genesis 1 is the big picture look at that. And the analogy in the to illustrate the difference between material origins and functional origins, he make John Walton makes the analogy to a college campus. Like if you're getting the story of the origin of a college campus, you're not getting information about like where the timber was harvested to construct the buildings, or where the granite and the cement was quarried to lay the foundations, or it's not about the construction and the materials. It's about the degree program, how this building became, the science hall, and another building became the English literature department, and this is their philosophy of education and that kind of stuff. So, and that's kind of what he's talking. That's kind of what Genesis 1 is about. It's about how God ordered the world to function as his temple, Adam as his image bearer. And then Genesis 2, you kind of have that same theme, except it's specific to the garden as this sanctuary where God dwells with man, and his reproducing with Eve is supposed to expand the Garden of Eden. But as far as so that, I think that when you read it in those terms and you pay attention to things like days 1, 2, and 3, God sets up the function. And then days 4, 5, and 6, he creates the functionaries. Like on day 1, he creates time by separating light from darkness. And the light he calls day, and the darkness he calls night, because he's creating time. That for there to be time, there has to be a differentiation from moment to moment. That's why he didn't just call the light light and the darkness darkness. He called it day and night. And then on day 4, he creates the functionaries. He creates the cosmic clockwork. And it repeats, God separated light from darkness by setting the sun, moon, and stars to be for times and seasons and years. And you kind of have that same like parallel themes in day 2 and uh, day 4, day 3, and day 6, culminating in day 7. And so, uh, to the young Earth creationist consideration, um, Well, just to back up one bit to make like the main objection to like the evolutionary theory and the Bible being compatible is that like young Earth creationists and other Christians object that one, the timeline the Bible lays out doesn't leave enough time for evolution to happen. So we had to have been specially created according to this thinking. And two, it was the fall of man that led to our mortality, that brought about death for man. If we evolved by natural selection to become human, then people had to die before, for millions of years before we even were people in order for that to happen. And those are the two main objections. But to the time issue, um, if it's not about the material origins, but the functional origins, the time issue, it doesn't really come into play. And especially so when you consider that there was evening and morning before there was a sun, moon, and stars in the sky, according to the book of Genesis. And so we're obviously not dealing with 6 literal 24-hour days, because that doesn't even it doesn't even make sense if there's no sun to rise and fall in the evening and morning yet. So any kind of consideration of literal time is out the window there. But anyway, I've been talking a lot, and I touched
I
on a
think
few things.
I think I agree with everything you said.
Well,
It's
dang
yes
it.
and it's yes and to me.
Right.
Because in chapter 1, everything is collective. Even Elohim as a word itself is a collective. Let us, he says, let us make man in our image. And and mankind. He doesn't enumerate out. He says man and women, but it's man and women, and then they're off. And then, but in chapter 2, it's so specific that it's not only Adam, but it's also Yahweh Elohim. And I think, to me, that being called out is specific and 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 insignificant. So you have the Elohim that makes these men, and then you have Yahweh Elohim make Adam, the man that's placed in the garden.
Interesting.
So
So
everyone else was placed in the world, but Adam was placed specifically in the garden. And to me, that distinction shouldn't be overlooked.
what's the distinction? What's the significance between distinguishing between Elohim in Genesis 1 and Yahweh Elohim in Genesis 2?
Because the distinction is that God himself specifically held Adam. This is the lineage. This is
Yeah. So you're saying it was the Elohim in one
Like
making
it
Adam,
was
yes,
plural gods
correct.
in Genesis 1.
and they made
Uh,
Adam man. But then in Genesis 2, it was Yahweh Elohim making Ha Adam,
Or at least
and put
emphasizing
right.
that lineage
It
is
personalized
important.
everything, and
Yes.
it made it personal and proper nouns instead
and
of
and I might be
pronouns.
getting it.
And
I might be getting ahead of myself here, but in First Corinthians, when Paul says that Adam was the first Adam, and then the last Adam is Jesus, right? So, or Christ. It's like that. That's the end of the spiritual thing. Like, uh, you know, God breathed into Adam, and that lineage went all the way to Christ to do his thing. And now all of us, regardless if we are part of Adam's lineage or not, even though the flood kind of we all are. But so I mean, it was just something but saying that he's the first man, and then the last is the spiritual, the last of the spiritual, kind of.
well,
Well,
yeah, I think
I have a different explanation of the First Corinthians distinction between Adam and Christ, but I don't want to get ahead
yeah,
of the discussion. But I I I don't think I can. I'm troubled by the polytheism suggested by your Genesis 1 reading. I don't think that I don't think the
polytheism.
Yeah, he's saying that like gods,
It was a
the
divine
gods.
council read, not a polytheistic read.
It sound and okay, well then maybe you can clarify to settle my to set me
So
at ease.
God made them all. Yahweh made them all breathe, right? He created all the man. I don't think that they was subcontracted to create man. But I think that the fact that he's called out specifically in chapter 2 just makes Adam special is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have no idea the time difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2 is what I'm saying. So the earth could have been fully populated. Also, the Garden of Eden, is depicted in, is kind of uh that paradise realm, like Adam was supposed to be the bridge between the spiritual and the and humans. Like he was special. He was the brother of whatever. He's an Elohim, right? Like he was a brother of of his older siblings that are created beings, and he
Mhm.
lost that ability to be near God, which was the fall.
Um,
He's
hmm.
special. He's
It is
Well,
okay. You know what? I've never actually really looked at the verse 1 and verse 2, or chapter 1 and chapter 2 this way. I I think I kind of fast read it every time I compared the two. But it is weird that Genesis 1 goes all the way down through, verse 21, God created whales and living creatures that moveth, which the waters brought. And then the fifth day, he said, I'm going to bring forth all the living creatures. And then he said, let us make man in our image and our likeness. So he did all of that. And then Genesis 2 says, it starts and it says, thus the heavens and the earths were finished. And on the seventh day, God rested. And then he's
yeah,
like,
that's a bad chapter break. That
and then it says, then there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. And then God formed man of the dust and breathed into him. And that's when he makes Adam. That is weird.
well,
I
yeah, that's why they're the proper and why that there was a 13th century cardinal named Stephen Langton who came up with all the chapter divisions in the Bible.
mhm.
Why he broke it there, I don't know, but I think it should be Genesis 1:1 goes to Genesis 2:2. That's the first chapter. And then the second chapter should be verse 4 on of chapter 2. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created, when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. And it's so just to kind of, so that's a weird chapter break. It should include the Sabbath day in Genesis 1 because it's part of the same thing. But
Even if the Sabbath break isn't there, like my point is in one, it already created man and all the animals, and then it said God rested. So like the first day is done, right?
you mean the first week?
I'm sorry, the first
sure.
week, yeah, the first Sabbath. We've gone all the way
Right.
around a full lunar week at this point, right? And on the seventh day, God ended his work. So even to say the chapter verse was back up and around, right? But then it's if you want to start with 4, right? These are the generations of the heaven and the earth when they were created, and every plant in the field. But then God's like, there's nobody to till the ground. But we just made man in our image like
Well,
a couple of
yeah,
days ago.
that's what I was talking about earlier when I said that a lot of people read this as two separate,
Hmm.
two distinct creation
Well,
stories,
and I
two different.
think I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that's where Dre was going
Right,
because
but
I
the issue that my issue with Dre's was that it sounds like he's saying that there were multiple deities involved in Genesis 1,
there are multiple
whereas
deities involved in the conversation prior to the making of man. I don't think he was implying that other deities were making humans. But I,
well,
I, won't- I won't speak for him, Dre.
Yeah, that's what I said.
You said
Wait, why
which.
why would they say us? Let's us make man in our image.
Right.
well,
But it says, hang on. It says, and God said, where does it? I just lost it again.
But he doesn't say that about Adam.
Hang on. No, it doesn't say it about him. Genesis 1, right? Genesis 1:26, God said, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness," right? So he's clearly having a conversation. I reject the idea that he's talking to himself. He's having a conversation with the council.
Mm-hmm.
But then verse 27 says, "So God created man in his own image." It doesn't say the Elohim created, right?
Well, the Hebrew there is I got to look it up. I'm
It
pretty
says
sure.
Yahweh Elohim,
Yahweh Elohim by name in Genesis 1. So my point is this
and it only
isn't
says Elohim. In no, in Genesis 1, it says Elohim. In Genesis 2, it says Yahweh Elohim.
So
okay.
Heiser explains that the let us make God in our let us make man in our image, in the image of God he made them. It's God speaking to the divine council, but it's
Mhm.
still God alone doing all of the creating. Like they're just witnessing God doing the creating, but they are not themselves participating in the act of creation. Um,
So
so
let me ask this. I'm not fine, Brian. That's fine. I'm fine with that. But my point is the distinction between mankind and Adam.
Right, and that was the thread that I was pulling on, Dre.
And then I'm going to ask this. Adam was placed specifically in the Garden of Eden, the place where God dwells. Where'd all those other people go?
Right.
well,
They didn't leave the garden with Adam because of the fall, right? Because the fall is something else, is something that is I think, and if you read, like, I don't know, the Adam and Eve story in Jubilees, or if you read it in the Ethiopian account, the 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 Garden of Eden is somewhere special. It's like that. It's almost like the waters of Narnia type of spot, where, which is why it was so heavily guarded when they were kicked out, because not only could they not get back in, but the fallen angels can't get there either. It was
I don't think the text, I mean, I mean, I'm not, if you want to read it that way, I don't want to, I'm not going to tell you you can't, but I don't think the text that, as I read it, I don't think the text itself is talking about, I think it's calling him Adam in Genesis 1. It's using the same Hebrew word that is used as his name in Genesis 2, but I think
but it has
it's,
a prefix.
Hang on, guys. I
you're saying it has a definite article in
Yes,
chapter, the Adam.
yes.
Sure. I mean, I think
because if you read it, Brian, and again, we're 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 attempting to extract something that
And
may
we're,
or may not be
and we're
right,
spending a lot
right?
of time on this
Right, but
part,
it's
which
part of the
is,
conversation. So
yeah.
I think it's worth. I think this is time spent. I don't think we're on a nit, but we all agreed before we started getting into the text. We all agreed that there were other humans in other places, right? So the
yeah.
three of us have already made that assumptive leap that the creation of Adam and Eve was not entirely unique
Right. I just
from a volumetric point of view.
right. And I have what, I have to qualify it before I present it, but the way that I think about it is accounts for that, but I don't think you can get that from that particular passage. But again, I don't want to dwell on that.
No,
It is worth
I'm
pointing
curious.
out,
Yeah, go ahead.
just for background sake, the Old Testament scholars typically there's this. Are you guys familiar with what's called the documentary hypothesis about the Torah? It's basically that the Torah is a combination of like five different documents that have been combined. There's like the Yahwist um, document, which uses the name Yahweh. There's the priestly document. I'm forgetting all the names of them, and that's how they account for the Genesis 1, Genesis 2 division. They think these are two different, entirely different, separate, unrelated traditions. Um, and okay, so it's the Yahwist, Elohist, Deuteronomist, and priestly sources. And so basically the Genesis 1, according to this hypothesis, Genesis 1 is the Elohist tradition. Genesis 2 is the Yahwist tradition. And they also use that to explain, like in Genesis 6, where God says to Moses, um, I've revealed myself to you as Yahweh, but to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I revealed myself. I did not reveal myself as Yahweh, but as El Shaddai. But to you and the Israelites, I will reveal myself as Yahweh. And this is after the burning bush incident, where he gives him his name of Yahweh. I am that I am. This is my name, that by which I will be remembered to all generations. So you have that, yet you have in the book of Genesis when, according to that, he didn't reveal himself as Yahweh to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet when you read their accounts, they're calling him by the name Yahweh. So they know the name, and like stuff like that is why they take that as support for the documentary hypothesis. Um, I don't subscribe to the documentary hypothesis. I think there's a theological reason why God said that to Moses. That's probably a different discussion. But it's just, for the listeners, it's just worth knowing about that as an option. You can consider it for yourself. But but yeah, so that was the background I wanted to add. Well, and I interrupted a point. So
I don't remember. But,
I think I get where Dre's going, and I don't hate it. I don't know. I don't know. Like, because Dre kind of just pointed it out in real time to me. So essentially, if you consider Genesis 1 and 2 to be separate but connected, then, and Brian, I think you were saying it earlier, that one was kind of the functional and two is the more specific and
well, not exactly. Like Genesis 1 is about the functional origins of the world. I think Genesis 1 is big picture.
right.
So I guess, yeah, it would include humanity as a whole, just
Right.
as it being in view, but I don't think that it means that God created like plural humans. I think that this was the start of humanity because of the one man and woman made in his image. And then Genesis 2 is kind of homing in on a more
I
man-centered look and about what it meant. From what point is he going to multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it?
I so I'm I don't want to take this argument too far. I think at some level you're pushing back on this concept because it would open a new can of worms with Adam not being the first.
Um,
I
I'm
think
not even I'm not even arguing at this point. I would
No, I'm just saying because you're saying it though.
well I,
You're making a broad statement, but you're kind of reserving. I'm not going to accept this one little theory over here because it doesn't fit. But my gut is that you're doing it because you haven't had time to think through theologically what that would mean if Adam wasn't the first human or not, based on the facts that we've kind of always assumed that, and that's kind of where we take Genesis
no,
2 from.
that's not why.
Okay.
And I'm not even arguing at this point. You had kind of like restated my position, and I was just
Okay.
clarifying what my
Okay.
position was. I'm totally ready to move on.
Hmm.
I
But
I thought we were going to talk about like Neanderthals and
we're trying to.
Denisovans, and
yeah.
so
We're trying to. This is
So
all part of it.
where does
okay.
Neanderthal come from?
Yeah, because and so let me just finish this. Make sure we're all at least clear what this idea is, right? That I think Dre was starting, and I'm kind of warming up to the more I think about it. If Genesis 1 is functional, big picture, 100,000 foot view, separating light from darkness, creating land, creating water, creating fish, creating life on Earth, human, right? And then Genesis 2 was God took a pause and said, "I need people in my garden, which is where my temple is." And then he made specifically Adam and Eve, right? And then the story continues. If you think about that, and I'm not saying you have to agree with it, Brian, I'm just kind of setting a conversational point.
Yeah.
And you think about that in non-young Earth terminology, that actually sets the tone for proto-man to have existed everywhere on Earth. But then Adam and Eve being the first truly in God's image specifically named by him, empowered by him, given dominion of the earth in Eden. Right? Like that actually
and
jives
and
and it
and
harmonizes.
they're hey young earthers, this is where you join in the story.
I,
Oh, there was
I
lots of shit before you, and here's where you join us, already in progress.
and I've told you guys my spiel on this a few times before on here.
Well, let's talk about it because it's specific to this
Okay.
episode.
Well, um, modern anthropologists believe that anatomically modern humans first emerged.
Like this guy.
That
Not
guy's a
no, I
prick
hate that
though.
guy. I don't want any association with that guy. Um, I should preface. Let me qualify this because like I have a whole stack of books like this one, The Genealogical Adam and Eve by S. Joshua Swamidass, and I've got some other related stuff by William Lane Craig, and they're like
Do you just
this is
have
a
books laying on the He's got a
I
stack of books. Do you have a
I
shelf, Brian?
I
Like I
do
don't.
I have bookshelves. I
Oh,
bought two new bookshelves. I
okay.
need to put them together to
Right on.
kind of clean up some of this stuff. But
This is why Brian's smarter than everybody. He just has
I
books laying around.
well
He
I
probably reads it as he's playing video games, and he's just
not as I play video games, but I'm probably
I
not
was,
smarter than everybody else. I have to study more than everybody else to catch up. But I have not read those books about that. They're in it. They're on the list. I'm not as well informed on this as I like to be on this, but there are discussions. Like William Lane Craig believes that the historical Adam and Eve, or the historical Adam at least, was like 500,000 years ago, and was like and like coexisted with, was like an hominid that predated modern Homo sapiens. There are others who place it more recently. To me, like I haven't heard my particular position addressed, or maybe it has been, and it's just not, I haven't gotten there in my reading yet. So just take this with a grain of salt. To me, it seems really easy and simple, which means I'm probably wrong. There's probably something I've overlooked, and I'm gonna discover that and feel foolish for what I'm about to say. But to me, it seems like so. Modern anthropologists recognize that anatomically modern humans first emerged about 200,000 years ago. Um, Coexisted with the Neanderthals. There was some interbreeding. Some theories that the Neanderthals were preyed upon humans, and we were their food, and there was a big war. Um, that's not a very It's a fringe theory, but it's would make for a pretty cool movie, I think. But anyway, anatomically modern humans existed about 200,000 years ago. Um, Behaviorally modern humans first emerged about 40 to 50,000 years ago, which is, relatively recent in the fossil record. Um, the distinction that makes the difference between behaviorally modern humans and anatomically modern humans is our capacity for abstract symbolic thought and communication, i.e., language. And so,
some would say, morals and the the desire to be near God.
well, and yeah, that would be part of it. Being able to think in abstract and symbolic
Mhm.
terms means an ability to assign moral value to certain acts, to certain people, to certain relationships.
Yeah.
But the you guys have heard me explain the word abracadabra. Um, in the folk etymology of that term in Western magical tradition is that it's Aramaic for "as I speak, I create." And when I say folk etymology, I mean modern linguists might dispute that, but that's not the point. the point is that it it represents a strain of thought within magical tradition that comes from Kabbalism, which is a mystical branch of Judaism, which recognizes that in Genesis 1, God 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 creates the world by speaking it into order. Um, God says, "Let there be," and there is. Makes man in his image to rule the world as his image bearer. God brings the animals to Adam to see what he will name them. So Adam participates in God's process of creation by introducing another dimension of order by naming the animals. So that this creative power of speech is what makes us in God's image. That's what makes the distinction. And this is not, outside of theology. This is modern anthropology. The distinction between behaviorally modern humans and anatomically modern humans is our powers of our creative powers of speech.
Yeah. So this guy that you hate agrees with you 100% what you
Yes.
said. Like 100%.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
does the devil.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
But
the point is, I think the logic is really sound, right? This guy Harari, he uses a term. He uses the idea of a fiction. Is what he refers to it as, this abstract thinking process, and he goes on to talk about, um, ancient man had wizards and mystics, and they put on funny robes and went to the holy place and made decrees and said magic words, and things changed and were different. Um, and then he goes on to explain, which is kind of cute how he does it, that we still have them today. They have dark robes and they go to the magical places called courtrooms and they say fancy words and things happen. And he talks about, incorporations, marriages, legal contracts, binding contract law.
and
Explains,
the economy, currency, governments,
yeah, all
cultures,
of those things, right?
they're
Like
all
that.
they
That
all exist as constructs of language.
he his real simple thing that he does, and I want to give him credit for it. Well, I don't. He's clearly not in our world with regards to theology and whatnot, but he talks about a car company and he uses Peugeot as an example because he's European. And he talks about, if you had a car manufacturer in the periods before this ideas of abstract law, and there was a fire and everybody in the building died, that company wouldn't exist anymore, right? It would just be done. But in today's world, if there was a massive fire and the entire Peugeot facility burned down, Peugeot still exists, right? Because there's people that could pick up that piece of paper and say, this is the new Peugeot facility over here. And they just build another facility after they got insurance money and all this stuff, right? And they'd build it, and they'd be making cars again. And that's just one example of the way that our ability to have abstract thought changes things. He also goes on to explain how that separates us from the animal kingdom in such an obvious way.
Yeah.
Because if a gorilla and a man were to fight, the gorilla always wins that fight. If five gorillas fought five men, the five gorillas still win that fight. But there's a point where scale becomes a disadvantage to regular animals and becomes a massive advantage to humans. And he's like, I don't know if it's 100, 1,000, 10,000, but there's a point where the number of humans would be able to organize and strategize in a way that it would go from being lopsided this way to being 100% lopsided this way. And the men would always win once you had this bigger scale, because you would have organization and government underneath it, and you'd have leadership and you'd have orders and you'd have all these things. And
Actual collaboration.
the animals could never scale, right? At some point, all animals, even pack animals, fall apart. But humans get stronger as our numbers get bigger because of this ability that we have that nothing else has ever had on planet Earth. So it's a really interesting and cool thing when you think about it. And this guy suggests that it almost happened overnight from an evolutionary point of view. So to your point, Brian, about being anatomically modern versus being behaviorally modern, he suggests that it happened like these humans just woke up one day and were like,
Yeah,
and
Because
kind of
the-
looking
the-
around at each other
because
like
the theory is the Neanderthals were actually smarter and bigger and stronger,
Mhm.
but I guess they couldn't organize.
they didn't have the
They-
abstract
Well, and-
thinking
Right,
that
yeah.
we
and
have.
there
Yeah.
and there's a little indentation at the base of our skull where our that accommodates our vocal cords, which enabled by Neanderthals didn't have that. Anatomically, modern humans had that, but they hadn't developed the mental, the aggregated
The
mental faculties
complexity to
to utilize it. But so just in the interest of full disclosure, it used to be like probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, up until then, the thinking among anthropologists was that there was this event they called the Great Leap Forward, where anatomically modern humanity, probably like one person suddenly, I don't know if they said one person. I'm kind of projecting my own
you're foreshadowing.
I'm injecting the Bible into it.
Yeah.
I don't want I need to be careful not to do that because I don't want to read my theology into it. But it, for all we know, it was just one person. But it was, and the description
His
was
name was
like,
Adam.
yeah, the description was the analogy that I've seen is that it's kind of like everybody on planet Earth, or most people, unless you're impaired in some way, is capable of learning how to play and probably sing to varying degrees of ability music. Like it's if you, I can't, but I have no doubt that if I put my mind to it, I could learn to play a guitar and I could learn to play whatever songs
That's
I
Matt's
heard.
theory on dancing as well.
Oh, I hold all of that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I agree with you completely. And not as somebody who started playing guitar
Yeah.
in their 40s,
But there's only
100%.
but on a planet of 8 billion people, there are only probably like a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, but a minuscule proportion who are capable of writing a hit song, a song that's going to endure, that everybody loves and wants to play over and over again. Um, but anybody who can learn to play music, who hears that song, can then play that song. It's easy to play a hit song that you've heard, if you just know how to play music. But it's a rare talent that can actually create the song anew, and that's kind of what the ability of language is described as by anthropologists, at least up into like that's how they describe the Great Leap Forward. Like maybe only a few people, if more than one, came like evolved the ability to speak, but once they could speak and they could speak to merely anatomically modern humans, then all of humanity could speak. Um, so the Does that make sense?
I understand it. I have massive disagreement with the underlying logic about songwriting versus song singing, but I understand where it's going. So
it's an analogy.
I don't want to litigate it.
Yeah, but I mean it's the analogy that
I saw your face.
paleontologists
I'm
were
like,
using.
but because there has been a hit song, now other hit songs can be mimicked or close to, or
Yeah,
there had to
I
be.
get what it's trying to say. We had to have the Beatles so that we could do this other stuff, but because
Right.
they exist, I get
So,
it. Like I said, I don't.
if we translate that into biblical terms, I would regard Adam to be the first behaviorally modern man, and then as soon as he could
Adam's
speak,
the Beatles. How
as soon as
blasphemous was that, Matt? You like that?
I'm only letting it go because I introduced it,
Yeah.
and I did it because I know how other people think. So I'm
Right.
gonna let it go.
Right.
yeah, I didn't come up with the analogy.
I get
I'm just
it. I
passing
get
it
it.
along.
Yeah.
So
No, I
but
mean,
It's a strong analogy. Whether it fits and nests perfectly is not the point. The
I'm
point
trying
is
not to be
we
a music
understand.
nerd.
Right? Yeah.
I'm trying not to be
So-
like, actually,
So today, though, the general consensus, and this could change in 5 years, and I think it actually has been changed in the past 5 years. Today, the consensus is that there was no great leap forward. It was this long, gradual, like emergence of different faculties that kind of amalgamated into behavioral modernity, but But again, who knows how long that paradigm will be in place. But the categories of anatomically modern humans and behaviorally modern humans, they still speak in those terms, although they just don't make such a strict, sudden distinction in time. It's more of a gradual spectrum as they depict it. But I think it's still, which is why, like, you really shouldn't try too hard to accommodate the book of Genesis to modern science, because the science is probably going to change, and then
Sure.
your Bible interpretation is going to have to change.
Well, and
And if
as
you're
we
peg
said,
and if you're pegging your religion to, its validation in science, well, that's shifting sand. Um,
we've
so
made the point on this show before, and I think it helps when you're with doing what you just mentioned. The Bible was meant to be a theology textbook, not a scientific textbook for us, right? It was meant to teach us about God and us and how these things work together. It wasn't put here to teach us how to do space travel. It wasn't put here to teach us how to rotate crops. It wasn't a lot of those
it
things.
it should still map to reality. So, like,
Sure.
I don't totally, it's not a science textbook, but if like, there should still be some, it, you know it I don't think we should get too wrapped up in trying to reconcile them,
That's
so
my point.
yeah,
Every time we make a new scientific discovery, our instinct shouldn't be to the Bible.
Right,
What does the
yeah.
Bible have to say about quantum physics?
Oh wow,
Nothing.
yeah.
Like pretty
Now I
much,
understand the
but
Bible better and different because
that's what
science.
Leviticus 2 was trying to say all along. Now I
but
get it.
but I
Muzzle
would
tough.
argue that the
Though
Bible,
there is
right?
wisdom in that,
I would argue that the Bible, rightly understood, um, it's not just compatible with evolution. Like, I wouldn't even put it as mildly as there's no conflict or even that it's compatible. I think it's about evolution. Um, when you look at, how Adam is described, um, the earth brought forth the living creatures, and then Adam, he's called Adam, as we've discussed. It means from the ground, from the earth. So he's got the same origin as the animals.
Doesn't it also
So
mean red, Adam?
Edom means red.
Edom means red. Oh, okay.
Um, but Adam, and this is very much emphasized in Genesis 2. It says God formed him from the dust of the earth. It's worth noting that the text doesn't tell us anything about the process, only tells us the material.
and
Like,
you and you return to dust too, right?
right. And this is part of the curse. Um, Adam rose up from the dust just like the animals did. He is given dominion over the animals. An animal, the serpent, deceives him into treachery against God, destroying the relationship with God. And then the curse is, like, if you read the curse in Genesis 3, there's kind of a preoccupation with dust throughout. First, let me bring it up so I'm not butchering it from memory. Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Woman gets child pains in childbearing. Desirable will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil, you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles. By the sweat of your brow, you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall, and to dust you will return. And in the language that we just examined in the Bible, like this, you know, yes, it means mortality, but it's kind of, it's it's like he rose up, along the same path as the animals, and then God breathed into him and made him a living being, made him in his image, but then he fell back into his animal nature. And that's kind of the conflict that you see throughout the New Testament when Paul talks about living by the Spirit versus living by the flesh. It's about living by your higher divine nature versus living by your lower animal nature, being ruled by your instincts and appetites the way animals are, or being ruled by your higher faculties like reason. And I think that's important to point out. In our last podcast, we talked about the war between us and the devil. Um, we didn't get much into the nature of that war and the objectives. But this is directly relevant to that because the enemy wants us to wallow in our animal nature. Adam was made in God's image when God breathed into his nostrils. He put his spirit in him, but he fell when he rebelled against God and was cursed. By Jesus' death and resurrection, he puts his spirit back into us so that we have that higher nature. And I'm you guys remember, when I almost joined that cult earlier this year?
Mm-hmm. How could we forget?
How could we forget?
So there was this part where there was this young guy gave a talk on living by the Spirit, and his uh, his instructions for this were it was all about like listening to your feelings in prayer. Um, like this is and I'm trying to remember. There was a specific turn of phrase he used that really kind of set me off, but I don't remember what it was. But
Can't imagine that.
the overall image the overall like gist I got of what he thought living by the Spirit was, and this is a pretty common thing. Um, it's living by the Spirit means turning off your targeting computer and intuiting the torpedo into the Death Star
Okay, Red 5.
exhaust port. But that's kind of how people think of it. It's like using the Force, and you just kind of let go and let God and let Jesus take the wheel. When no, if we read it in biblical terms, the conflict is between our animal nature and our higher faculties that God gives us. It is very much using reason. Like we come to the knowledge of God
Hmm.
through apologetics arguments, through the historical case for the resurrection by reason, and then we know that that's true. But often our feelings throughout the day will have moods where we feel like we're distant from God. This stuff can't be true. The world's too dark.
So
Or
Obi-Wan was the devil?
I mean, I think the Force was kind of basically Gnosticism. It was this sort of like all the stuff we tell people to do that sounds spiritual. That's listen to your gut and your intuition and your feelings. That's the Holy Spirit guiding you. Well, no, the Bible, warns against um, following your feelings, mistaking your own moods and whims and intuitions for the leadings of the Spirit. You guys,
I don't. I trying to articulate how I disagree with that.
okay,
Like a lot.
okay, why?
Didn't I just say I'm trying to come up with that?
Okay,
Didn't I?
I'm just,
Didn't I just?
I'm,
What am I on the clock? Like what am I?
I'm just,
Number one draft pick? Like what?
I'm just letting you
I'm
know
think I'm coming.
I'm all
I'm
ears.
coming up with this in
I
real time.
same.
I
I
think it's both,
I
and
get what you're saying.
I do too.
I want to like what you're saying
Okay,
I don't.
because I get where it's coming from.
I like that.
So the idea of
Fucking Ed McMahon over here. Yes.
try um the idea of trusting your feelings over your logic or, you know, your education makes sense if your logic and education is well honed and
Sure. Yeah.
is
Same with
properly.
feelings, though.
That's where I was going.
Okay, thank you.
So your I think the problem is that the commonly used phrasing of how we are to interpret the impact of the spirit is it coming from within. Like that's the language that's used in church circles when they
Okay.
talk about salvation, the spirit coming into you,
Okay.
and now you're being guided by your new nature, that it comes from within. I think the language that you're using is suggesting that that spirit should go into your prefrontal cortex instead, because that's where the higher operating abilities of humans are, and that any time that we're operating off of instinct, that's probably the animalistic component of us.
What are
The
we,
key,
Spock?
the key,
Like
the
what?
key word being probably.
I think that's where, but I think that's where Brian's getting at, and here's, I think this is why it's troubling, because when we talk about spiritual decision making, right? Oftentimes, especially if we were going to start, you know, quoting all of the uses of it from Jesus, he talks about love, right? And we as humans in modern language talk about love coming from our heart. So I think that's where I get what you're saying, and I understand the spirit from where you're bringing it. Pardon the pun on the use of the word spirit. Um, but I think that's why I'm wanting to push back at the same time, say yes to what you said. Dre, I don't know if I covered the same thoughts you were having or not, but
Yeah, ish. But it's funny. I mean, then what is the matters of the heart?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking. Like,
Well, I mean, is there a difference between matters of your heart and matters of your mind?
um,
Because the
I
Bible makes a distinction in several times about your heart. I can't quote them. I'm looking for them right now, but
like the heart is deceitful above all else and
it,
desperately wicked.
it could be.
I mean, that's scripture.
yeah,
And
but
that's
it's Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus is saying, you know, if your eye causes you to sin, cast it out. If your hand causes you to sin, chop it off. You know, and he gets to your heart, and he talks about your heart being changed, right? And that's when your heart is changed, you're changed,
sure, but
right?
but they also thought that the heart was the seat of thought as well. Um, like they didn't it, it that we can't read that and take it to mean that if you have the new nature, you automatically have all the right feelings. You're you still have the flesh to contend with, and your flesh is your instincts and your appetites and your wishful thinking and your inflated ego and spiritual mature. Now, I think as you mature, as you how do they put it in Hebrews? About the teaching of righteousness, being for the mature.
Mm-hmm.
Like as you go on, hold on.
Well, I think while you're looking it up, I mean, even the other part, the other verse that you quote often about, you know, improving yourself and improving all of the different components of you, right?
Make every
Is
effort to add
yeah,
to your
that
faith.
So what does it mean to love the Lord with all your heart, your spirit, I mean your soul
yeah,
and your mind?
that's what I'm
Your
getting
heart,
at
soul,
is
mind,
There
I
and strength.
there are so those are different components that seem like they are equal. So what?
Well, would you?
Now, just because
Emotion,
your heart can be deceived, so can your fucking mind, and so can
sure,
apparently so can your soul.
but
But
the
so
thing
those things
is,
have to work together. I mean, we're not Spock. We're
um,
not.
yeah, but I disagree with, like, I've said, I think I've talked to you guys about this before. I don't think I've, not often, but like, I would love to see something like a Vulcan logic revolution within the church. I think that's the thing we need to reform. But I reject the Star Trek view that the more logic you have, necessarily the less emotion you have. And so that to be more logical, you have to drive out emotion. But emotion divorced from logic is disordered. If you're leading with your emotion and logic is an afterthought, that's insanity. That's not, that you're not behaving as a human being should behave if you lead with emotion and don't present logic first. Logic should start first, and emotion should respond to that. And it's in a practical sense, like there's the Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding, and all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. People often quote that to mean like it's all feelings, and reason is just sort of beside the point. But this is applicable only, and it's ironic that people get that from Proverbs, which is all about knowledge and wisdom and honing the mind, the way Solomon exampled. Um, yeah, when there's a conflict between what you know to be from God and what your reason is able to grasp, yeah, that's when reason needs to take a back seat. But you still apprehend that God exists by reason. You apprehend that Christianity is true, that Jesus rose from the dead by reason. That's the anchor. That's your starting point for that's what initiates you into the Christian life, by which you receive the spirit from God, the spirit of God, and a new nature. And then but your starting point when you're a brand new Christian, you still have your fallen nature. I still have my fallen nature now, and I've been a Christian for almost 30 years. But because of your fallen nature, you should be suspicious of your emotions. You can't take whatever feeling you have while you're praying, or any given moment of the day, as automatically being from God. The scripture says to test the spirits to see if they're from God. And the thing with logic is that, yeah, you know, I, you know, people have flawed logic all the time. I talk to them on a daily basis. But the thing with logic is that you can show your work, you can discuss it, you can explain what your reasons are for how you get from premise A to conclusion Z. And other people can see that and say, well, here's the fallacy in your reasoning, and you can learn and grow from that. But if you just say, but feelings are unfalsifiable. Like I can make a rational, reasoned argument for why Christianity is true, but when you ask somebody, and we are commanded to do that, by the way. The Great Commission is I mean, we're supposed to be a proselytizing religion where we go out into the world and we persuade people of the rightness of Christianity against their centuries of deeply ingrained religious and cultural tradition. Um,
I'm not
but
sure I can tie this back to what we're talking about today.
well,
I don't know where we went,
trust me, I'll get us back there.
but it doesn't feel like it. So let's.
Well, we're talking about our animal nature versus our higher divine,
Matt, it doesn't feel like it, but logically, it's going to get back there.
and you'll be able to test that. Um, so you don't have to, feelings are unfalsifiable, and we often, feel things in line with our wishful thinking and our inflated views of ourselves, and that leads us astray. And the Christianity is so fractured today because we can't sit down and have a logical conversation with another professing Christian who disagrees with us, because they always invoke their feelings as being more sacred and more decisive than any arguments you can make. And so everybody kind of huddles in their conclave, convinced that their denomination is the right one, and all those other people aren't doing it right. And it's all because we lead with our feelings, and we have this idea that following the Spirit means following what is in actuality your animal nature.
Speaking of, I met a white Messianic Jew this weekend.
Okay.
I just thought that was interesting.
Did you get into a heated argument that was
Not heated.
Clouded by feelings?
We had a pleasant conversation.
But you just said that feelings are false due to wishful thinking.
I said they're often false because of that.
So it's your logic that's wrong and not your feelings. So what I'm trying to say is that they're equal. They're on the same footing. Without feelings, your logic is fucking Vulcan.
Well, and go back to what I said previously. Having less of one doesn't mean having more of the other.
But I don't think that one necessarily has to lead the other. I think it's symmetrical.
I think I don't know about that. I think
Sure.
I think your logic.
Well, I feel that you're fucked up. So
I think your logic should be the driver behind your decision making, but your feelings can be the way in which you do the thing. So
okay.
if I was going to harmonize the two of you right now, right? Brian's saying, feelings suck. They take you down the wrong path. Look what it did to Eve. Because that clearly wasn't her logic that caused the fall, right? Dre, you countered with, what about, the command to love the Lord with all your heart, right? But the way if I was gonna take those two and make them make sense together, is that commandment is to love the Lord with enthusiasm, with energy, with passion, with love, which is
And that
all the
doesn't come
things
from
that
your brain.
It comes from your heart, right? But it's your brain that tells you it's right to worship the Lord.
Yeah.
Based on all the things that Brian was just saying. Because
Sure.
if you only loved the Lord because of your heart, you don't really have a premise through which your love is justified. You happen to be right. It's like being in math class and you got the right answer, but you have no idea how you got there, so you didn't actually learn the lesson. Even though you ended up with the right answer, you can't replicate it.
Or you can know the Lord's true, but you don't actually love him.
That's entirely possible also, right? The devil knows that God is worthy of worship and adoration, yet
Well,
he doesn't do it.
and I agree with that. And faith is not just knowing that Christianity is true. It's not even just believing it's true. Faith is a response to that knowledge. But that's why, but it, and yeah, some people will get that knowledge and still choose to hate God. They're not born again. They don't even have a new nature to draw from. They're still dead in their sins. But the gospel is preached to people who, generally, when people hear it and they understand that Jesus really did rise from the dead, and I've gone over these verses before in 1 Peter 1:21, through Christ you believe in God who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Yeah, you do have feelings and when you respond to that, but a lot of people will, we've talked about how if you ask people why they believe this stuff, they'll say, oh, it's because I have faith. Which of course is not an answer. That's a restatement of the question. But what they'll tell you that means is that, oh, the Holy Spirit confirms it for me. Well, how do you know that's the Holy Spirit confirming it? Well, I just feel that way. Well, if you ask a Muslim how he knows the Quran is the directly dictated word of Allah, he has the same basis. I mean, when you ask Mormons, why do you believe the Book of Mormon? Well, I have a burning in my bosom. That's the Holy Spirit confirming it. Well, what if I have a burning in my bosom that I say is the Holy Spirit telling me it's wrong? Why, which one is valid? And that's why you have
I don't think that that's really fair.
what
I think the burning in the bosom is based upon facts. So, I mean, it's this. There's an apologetics for Mormons as well. So, I mean, sure, some will just say it's because I have a burning in my bosom, but that's not why. It's because there's a testament of Joseph Smith with witnesses. So I mean, whether you believe that happened or not, that's not where their faith comes from.
okay. Well, that's a common answer that you
Okay,
get
well,
from
it was a
Mormons.
common answer for Christians too.
That's exactly my
Yeah.
point, right?
100%. Yeah.
Um, and but to your point, that's exactly what I'm saying. If it's more than just a burning in the bosom, then you can present
I,
arguments.
I,
You can use reason to determine if this checks out.
I'm about to pause the recording so I can say this out loud. I actually get what Brian's saying. Like,
No, you can't pause that. That's got to go in. In fact, that's got to be
no, I know
a
I
snippet.
didn't.
Why
I
would you
didn't.
want to
I didn't pause it because we fought over this a lot. Like, so this is actually a point that Brian's been very consistent with, and
This is our like 3 hour long argument outside of the sushi restaurant in downtown
uh-huh,
Tulsa a few years
uh-huh,
ago.
and I was probably as resistant, more resistant, or dismissive than anybody Brian's ever said this to.
Yeah,
Um,
you were.
I actually get his point now. So I don't know if that's well done, Brian, or if I'm a punk because I finally cave to your games. But I get what you're saying
Fun games.
100%. No, I'm trying to be funny.
Yeah.
Um, so Dre, just to restate what he's saying is that he does hear that a lot from Christians, and Brian's concern, he says it differently. I'm going to say concern because I'm trying to be gracious, is that Christians very possibly not a Christian if they can't if they don't understand why they believe what they say they believe, because to truly believe you have to get it, and you can't get it because mama and daddy told you to.
Well, I actually agree with all of that.
Yeah.
I just think that the downplaying of the other side is not correct.
I think it sounds borderline hateful, and I don't know how to couch
That's
it in
not
a
even
different
why it
way.
is for me because we talked about this in our consciousness episode. I believe that we have separate brains in cells. I think that we have this nature inside of us where we do know. And I think that it's our brain that convinces us that our feelings are right or wrong. So I guess with the
I think it
righteousness,
should be. I think it
I think
should
that
be what you just said. I think should be is the right word. I don't think that's always the case for all of us.
I don't no, I disagree. I mean, I don't disagree though. So it's because I think that the brain is just the mind, the logic is just as misled as
Oh,
the
100%
feelings
can
of the
be.
heart. So
Absolutely
I
can
think that
be.
they
Eh,
are symbiotic. I think that they are masculine and feminine.
but I want,
They
but
are equal to me.
Hmm.
I want to reiterate here, and by like I don't like just I don't think I agree with anything you said there about this. I mean, it's not an argument I want to have. I'm just,
Sure.
but I just want to reiterate that I'm not talking about reason versus feelings universally. I'm talking about for the Christian who has the new nature, who has been reborn in the Spirit of God.
Nope,
Um,
same thing to me. Same thing.
um, like I'm not saying that like if you're a, if you don't have the new nature, ignore your feelings and follow only your reason and you'll get to God. But you can't. One, Christians too often try to bypass reason to initiate people into Christianity if they're
I
even trying
agree
to
with
do it at
that.
all. and also once you become a Christian, people we think that following the Spirit means shutting off your reason and going by your feelings, turning off your targeting computer, and you can feelings the torpedo into the Death Star, when the consistent counsel of Scripture is one that, I mean, it's just sort of taken for granted that the Spirit is given in order to guide you as this sort of like Jiminy Cricket, supernatural
Just give a little
source of
whistle.
source of revelation, and that's not what it says. You receive the Spirit to get a new nature primarily. That's what everybody who is a Christian gets. Some people, not everybody, and not most people, and I think today they're far fewer than most Christians think. Some people get the gift of prophecy. For some people, the Spirit is a source of ongoing revelation or revelation for the church. But there's this idea within the church that the whole point of getting the Spirit is for him to kind of be your inner guide. When no, that's what the Bible is for. That's what other Christians are for. And what you do get in the scripture is, there's constant warnings in the Old Testament about false prophets. Do not listen to the prophets and the dreams you encourage them to have, for I have not sent them, says the Lord. The true prophets, the consistent pattern for them is that they're the people saying things that people don't want to hear. They're telling these things to believers. Um, and also, if in the New Testament, taking that example, just as there are false prophets among the people, so there will be false teachers among you who will secretly introduce destructive heresies, even denying the sovereign Lord who bought them. They will make a business out of you with plastic words, Peter says. And like Paul, when he was leaving Ephesus for the last time in the book of Acts, he's beside himself, crying, because he says, I know that after I leave, savage wolves will come in among you and destroy the flock. And I mean,
And,
they're
and we know
based
crying
on,
is illogical, so Paul's wrong.
come on.
I think
But were you just looking for something to jump in and
no,
agree
well,
with, or do you see my
kind of,
point?
but at the same time, even within your examples, as you're saying them, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's also feelings. Like, I'm just like, yeah, I got it. What's your personality type, by the way? Do you know?
If you don't know that after 30 years, I don't know, man.
You don't know?
I don't believe in those. I don't believe in personality type tests, and
I don't believe in personalities.
I believe in personalities.
Well,
I don't think you
you
can
can
peg
take a
people
test
with
and
a.
based on your pattern of what you consistently believe.
I mean, I just think those are arbitrary, and
Are they? Because
yeah,
mine hasn't changed over 40 years.
well, all right. But
Okay, so yeah,
but I'm not sure what that's apropos to, but
it's apropos to feelings versus thinking.
well, whatever I'm
It
saying,
is
it
apropos.
it's either, it, it its level of correctness or incorrectness has nothing to do with my personality type. Um,
No, but it has everything to
No,
do
but your
with
bias does.
your
Yeah.
perception.
Yeah.
um,
Because clearly your personality type is one that highly favors logic and structure over emotion and any of those things. And you can be correct about the high level of what you're saying, but some of the next level follow on is going to be colored by your personal interpretation because it feels right. And I use the word feel purposely there. Um, I think at a high level, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I think either you're using some of the words specifically or intentionally to make a point whereas it sounds to others as if you're dismissing the use of intuition and not intuition,
Even intuition, I
empathy,
think.
empathy in the way that a person might think or do things, right? Um,
How do you get that I'm dismissing empathy?
because
Um,
you're suggesting, at least it sounds like you're suggesting that um, decision making is devoid of emotion.
I have not said that, and
You
All
didn't
I'm
say it.
saying,
I said it
all
sounds like
all
you're
I'm saying
implying
is
it.
that multiple things can be true at once, and we say that all the time, and it doesn't mean that. I think that there's multiple correct answers here.
hmm. And to emphasize, because you said it sounds like I'm saying a certain thing. I'm not saying you like we need to all go through Kolinar and purge ourselves of our emotions to become beings of pure logic, because I reject that having less emotion means having more logic or vice versa. I think that's a fallacy from Star Trek that I utterly reject. But emotion should uh, you should lead with logic and emotion should follow. Emotion that bypasses logic and reason is disordered.
I don't.
And it's often the case. I'll hear I'll
And
come
there's
across
and
a
there's where
passage in the Bible.
that's where we'll agree is that oftentimes people mistake those things and actually bypass. I'm not saying bypass, I'm saying use. I'm saying they're both applicable. That's not bypassing.
As you mature spiritually, you learn better how to discern your feelings. But just to reiterate, the thing that I'm pushing back against that's common among Christians is that it's all feelings. They think whatever feeling they're having is automatically the Holy Spirit guiding them.
And I agree with that. But
Okay.
I mean that's how you started it, but that's not the road you went down. And I think that's what Matt was telling you. Like you're you are dismissing it
Yeah,
only because too many people mess it up.
right. I
Well,
think like we all collectively agree at your high level point.
Yes.
It was as you continue to come down through it, it was like we're like, wait, whoa, wait, yikes, hey, hang on. The more specific you got, the more it felt like you were going going
I
into a
mean,
different
it's been
place.
proven that things in your cells, in your body, react faster than your brain. That's why you can hook a machine up and someone can predict what you're going to say or do before you can.
well,
Because
that's apples and oranges though. Like
I
we're
don't think
talking
it is. I
like
think there's a wisdom. There's a
you're talking
wisdom deep.
about survival adaptations
No,
for
well, that's an aspect of it, but that's not what I'm talking about. We talked about it in the conscious episode, and if anyone wants that, they can go back and check that out. But
We haven't plugged an episode in a long
I,
time.
yeah, so
I'm talking about your worldview and how how you plan your life according to what you believe God wants from you. Um, it's some people we think that living by, and I've heard people say this consistently, living by the Spirit means you know praying and listening for certain feelings
So
when
I've got a really good idea.
okay.
This is a great segue into us doing a show about the Holy Spirit and what it is and what it isn't.
I,
And we've
I
been
I think
talking
so.
about doing that show also.
What he is and isn't.
Love it.
But
So is the good.
I think we
Yeah,
should segue
we
this
did
to
talk
that
about
because I
that.
think we're turning this into and it's a good conversation, by the way, and it's spicy and let's do it. But
But
let's do it next week.
yeah, I
Okay.
think that's a good idea. But just to revisit the whole early man thing, I think that the way use the language that the Bible uses to describe man, the anthropology itself and man's origins from the dust and back to the dust and being cursed in our nature. It's about the animal nature within us versus our higher nature in the spirit, and that's the conflict. And so, but yeah, I think talking about the other side of that, what it this today, I think we the focus was on what it means to resemble the man from the earth. Next week will be what it's like to resemble the man from heaven.
We found a good way to make fun of young earthers in the process. So
That's
I call
bonus.
that a win.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, Trey, you want to wrap
this
us up?
was spicier than usual.
Uh, yeah, I just, oh man, I lost something I had. I just think that um that Adam had a special plan, and that plan, eventually involves us. I think more than just the origins of where we come from, it's kind of the destination, and I think that's what Paul was saying in Corinthians when he said that Adam, the first Adam was a was a was being life giving,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
The
then
first Adam was a living being. The
was a
second
living
Adam,
being, and the last Adam was a life-giving spirit. And I think that that's kind of the beginning and the end for that, which helps us with our salvation and getting us back to God.
Mm-hmm. I dig it.
all right.
And there were a bunch of pre-Adams running around.
But bunch of preamps that we interbred with, and now we're playing
Filthy
well.
hobbitses.
So is that so? What I mean, were they planted all over the world?
I think so.
Right.
I
So
think
we have
they,
all these pyramids, and we talked about the Göbekli Tepe, and all that. Was there in lots of similar stories with gods and
well, I think there's and that's a whole nother conversation,
it is
right?
right.
Like how did all of the other proto Adams get information, and is this pre or post Tower of Babel?
Yeah, I think the historical Adam was 40 to 50,000 years ago. The Genesis 3 through early Genesis 6 was like 40,000 years ago to about, I don't know, 15,000 years ago. The flood was the Younger Dryas extinction event um, that happened about 13,000 years ago. And then, um, Göbekli Tepe came out of that, and the Mesoamerican pyramids and the
But
Tower of
I thought
Babel. And
Göbekli Tepe was like 50,000 years ago.
no,
It's
that's
like
about
10 or
15,000
12,
years
right?
Oh,
ago.
is that all? Oh, okay.
Now, well, let me back up. I think the most recent portion of it was about give or take 13,000 years ago. I think it was.
Oh, around 9 to 8,000 BC.
So do we think
9,500 to 8K BC. That's
Okay.
that's
so
10,000.
do we
10
think that there was a pre-flood golden age of lots of knowledge and technology and
Yeah,
overall brilliance
I
that
think
was just lost in the flood?
yeah, I think that the ancients described Atlantis as the
Right,
capital
that's what I was going to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
of this worldwide empire.
Is it because we had gods living among us?
I mean, I think those stories are consistent with what we find in the Book of Enoch and
The
the Bible.
Watchers
Yeah.
and other
It wasn't was it biblical, guys?
Egyptian lore and
Yeah, guys, help me out. Was it biblical or was it extra biblical with the conversation around the Watchers being specifically tied to Cain's descendants? Wasn't the whole thing with Tubal
I think
Cain?
we had a discussion about it
Are you
in one
talking
of our
about?
episodes where I had theorized that it was Cain's descendants that were first to mate with the Watchers.
Well,
And
there
then we
was
kind of went down a
definitely.
rabbit hole on that.
I thought there was something that was that was hard and fast about
The
Tubal
movie
Cain.
the movie Noah talks about that.
Is that where it came
Russell
from?
Crowe.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
which
Maybe
is-
that's
but Tubal Cain was like the first with like music and stuff, right? So
technology. That was
technology was given.
That's what I was getting
in
at.
the in the
But that's
metallurgy.
biblical, right?
That is biblical.
Okay. Okay.
Well, it
That's-
doesn't specifically say the Watchers gave it to them, but there's
It's
there's
kind of implied
circumstantial
because the timing is right there. Also,
there's circumstantial evidence that
Yeah.
that leaves it open to that.
I'll
but
allow it.
You can get the death penalty with circumstantial evidence.
I'll allow it.
So did we solve it? Young Earthers, are you mad? Hit us up. Let us know.
I still want to have a young Earther on.
We gotta have one on. This gotta happen.
Don't you know some?
And I won't even get emotional. Yeah, I will. But so did we solve it? John,
Yeah,
what do you think?
we definitely solved early hominids, early
It's
humans.
clear. It's clear.
And we were all over the place in Mount Hermeneutics fashion.
This is
I
like
hope
an
this episode,
this old school episode.
this conversation, we kind of went and twisted and turned, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you're with us still, you're either super confused and angry that you stayed this long, or you enjoyed the ride. I don't know. My mom watched, and I'm sure she liked it. So and that's all that really matters. My mom.
I feel
Everybody
like
else
Alan's sitting at home with a
Linda.
sign that says, "I'm only here for the violence."
Right, yes. So we got halfway spicy. So and we're growing. We didn't even hurl words at each other and challenge to a duel or anything crazy like that.
Yeah. Dre, you ignorant slut.
Yeah,
I've got my glove over here.
So with that, and especially on this topic, I need you to stay curious and stay enlightened, even though you're supposed to do it logically. And we'll see you next week. God bless.